Well, our special guest on NDTV today is one of the finest economists in the world, the former Reserve Bank Governor, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, who's out with his latest book, The Third Pillar. It's also a very timely book, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, because here we are heading into the general election, which is about 2.5 weeks away. And the state of the economy, I think, is going to be a big issue as voters make up their minds. So thank you for talking to us today on that. Coming straight to the book and what you've written, you have talked about populist nationalism, and you've said that this will undermine the liberal market democratic system that has brought developed countries the prosperity they enjoy. Can you elaborate your concerns on populist nationalism?
Well, the book is really about how the system worked and why it's not working anymore in the West, with, of course, allusions to what's happening in India and China. And my sense is what worked was that everybody had a chance, and they had a chance to succeed in the system. And what's not working anymore is opportunity for all, that too many people don't have the education they need. Technology has increased the requirements of what the kind of tools, the kinds of skills they need. And today, because the quality of schooling that everybody has access to, the quality of colleges they have access to is so widely different, it dooms them right from the beginning. And that is creating anger. We don't have the same chances at success as those other people who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth. That was never the case with capitalism as it worked in industrial countries before. There was a fair amount of spreading in the quality of education, and that allowed people with high school degrees to get good jobs. Today, if you have a high school degree, you can't get a decent job. But even getting a good high school education itself is very difficult, because the quality of schools varies so much between rich districts and poor districts. And I draw parallels, of course, to India. But what happens is, when you have this, is you have populists from the left and the populists from the right coming in. The populist from the left wants to tax the very rich and redistribute. The populists from the right are talking about populist nationalism. It's not you who are the problem. It was those other guys, the minorities, the foreigners, the immigrants who are taking your jobs. And so they, instead of saying it's up to you to redefine yourself in this new environment, they have somebody to blame. And that's really the reason why they say you're being held back. And that's dangerous, because over time it creates more scope for conflict, it creates fractions within the country, and it creates fractions between countries.
Is that exactly what's happening in India right now?
I don't think it's exactly. I mean, no. I think the picture in the West is different. But there are similarities in the sense that one of the big issues in India today is jobs. Are there enough jobs for all the people who are graduating from universities? And the answer is there does seem to be a paucity of jobs, that too many graduates are trying for low-level jobs because they're not finding jobs that suit their needs. And similarly, for people leaving agriculture, agricultural productivity hasn't increased. Incomes are falling in agriculture. Of course, prices have fallen recently, which has added to agricultural distress. People want to leave. Where do they go? And so, to some extent, the lack of job creation mirrors the problems in the West. That is, good jobs for the people with moderate education is simply not there. We've got great jobs for people who leave IIMs, McKinsey, Bain, etc. But for people who are leaving ordinary colleges, are we providing enough jobs? Are
we in denial then about the jobs crisis? The very fact, for instance, that the NSSO's report, which was ready in December, has pretty much been kept in abeyance by the government. It's not officially being released. They called it a draft report. They weren't even willing to accept the figures that had leaked in the media. So are we in denial that there is a jobs crisis?
I think the reality is that if you just look at some of the anecdotal evidence, how many 25 million people are applying for 90,000 jobs in the railways, that kind of evidence suggests there's a huge hunger for good jobs. And of course, our job statistics have been very poor for a long time. And so we need to improve the collection of those statistics. We can't rely on the EPFO, or we can't rely other sort of make-do versions. We actually need to collect better job data. But pending that, I think it would be problematic to say that people don't want jobs, that they're plentifully supplied. I mean, some of these agitations, whether from the JARTs or the others, is a reflection of the fact that their youth are looking for jobs. Many of them looking for jobs in the government because that's the one job which promises security.
Just on this point of the jobs data, now the fact is that you're right. We don't have a very good way of measuring employment and unemployment rates, but you at least had the NSSO, which was considered sort of the benchmark by which we would measure this data. Do you think it's unfortunate the way that this has played out in the way that the government has sought to not make this data public and basically then rubbish it at the end of the day?
Well, I think stepping back from the controversy around specific actions, I think more broadly, whether it's jobs data, whether it's GDP data, we need to take a fairly clean, independent look at our statistics process. And essentially, what I would think might be useful is get a panel of independent experts and think very carefully about the processes we follow. And it may be they're all perfectly good, in which case the experts will give us a rubber stamp of approval. But it's time, given the controversy back and forth about our whole statistical process, which has historically been very good, that we clarify some of the noise around it. We had a number of economic experts the other day complaining about the quality of the data or the biases that had crept in. And I think given that kind of anxiety, it is important just to convey to the world that we are not manipulating anything. This is our data. To actually have an independent group look into it and certify that in fact our data are fine, or here are the changes that we need to make.
Do you believe the GDP data?
Look, I think the problem with the GDP numbers stem right from when the change came, when suddenly we upgraded our growth rates, when in fact by the old GDP numbers our growth rates were looking very, very weak at that time. And since that time, we haven't seen a strong increase, for example, in capital investment, especially by the private sector. And consumption has been okay, agriculture with ups and downs, but really investment hasn't picked up. And there is a sense that if we were growing so strongly, why isn't it showing up in lower capital utilization and more investment? And this has been going on for a number of years, which is why I think it's important to take a look at our numbers. Are we really growing so strongly? One of the problems with numbers that don't tally with reality is that you can have policy mistakes. For example, monetary policy may be too tight given where we actually are, or too loose depending on which way the numbers go.
Well, I just want to go back to the passages from the book and again to the issue of populist nationalism. And you've given examples of white majoritarianism in countries like the United States and then the Hindu nationalism of the RSS. And you say that populist nationalists identify minorities and immigrants as the usurpers. And these are fabricated adversaries that are necessary to the populist nationalist agenda. So do these dangers... is this a danger that a diverse country like India is facing today?
Look, it seems to me that our founding fathers, for the diverse country that we are, gave us a set of principles, a constitution, which was very important and which helped knit the country together. And I think this is something that we lose at our peril. So, whenever I've spoken on this, I've said tolerance and respect is really in our DNA. And it's something that we lose at the risk of, hampering our economic growth tremendously. Forget the moral and the ethical issues associated with it. That it is necessary to knit this country together, and so that is why I feel particularly worried when I see certain groups being sort of singled out as outsiders and so on.
In fact, you've talked about, again referring to the RSS, you've talked about how they use their period in power to infiltrate India's institutions with their sympathizers. Now, is the reconstitution of the RBI board a classic example of that?
Well, look, I don't want to go into specific instances, and I think the RBI board, it has some very fine people also on it. I think the broader issue we need to consider is really to what extent we want many of these institutions, people by a variety of personalities. I have no problem with people from a certain political leaning come in if there is balance. If there is, on the other hand, an attempt to crowd out any other points of view, then our institutions become unbalanced. And that becomes a problem in the longer run because they tend to lean towards a certain view of the world, a certain view of what is appropriate policy. And ultimately, a varied country like ours works on the basis of checks and balances.
Is that happening to the extent that not just the RBI board? Look at the institution of the Niti Aayog, for example. The Niti Aayog was releasing these revised GDP numbers, which is not in its domain to do. The head of the Niti Aayog has been making some very political statements, including just 24 hours ago. Does that not undermine institutions then when that happens?
Look, I mean, first, let me not get into specific controversies because I'm not the best informed about those. I think whenever any institutional head speaks in public, there's always the challenge of conveying information. Often because they are organs of the government, they have to portray the effort in a reasonable light. But at the same time, you don't want to adopt policies that are against the longer-term national interest and that become problematic for the economy down the line. That's a balancing game that every head of these institutions plays. It becomes harder to play these balancing games when you have a distorted structure in your institution. So going back to your earlier point, I think balance in these institutions is extremely important.
One of the big headlines in the last 24 hours has been Rahul Gandhi's announcement about a basic minimum income for India's poorest. Right. What are your thoughts on that? He's talked about 72,000 rupees a year for 5 crore families. That works out to about a minimum of 6,000 rupees a month. Is this something that is viable? The big question everyone is asking is, where will the money come from?
Right. I think what matters in schemes like this are the details. What is it going to substitute for? Is it going to be an add-on to everything else? Is it going to substitute for a bunch of things? How well targeted is it going to be? Are we going to focus on the poorest of the poor? How do we get to them? How do we make sure that there's not a huge amount of leakage in the process? What we have discovered over time is giving money directly to people is often a better way. It's a way of empowering them. If at the same time they can use their money to acquire the services that they need, which today we provide very inefficiently, that could be a plus. But what we need to really understand about the cost of the system is what are the various things it is going to substitute for, which is why I think the idea, as I understand it, of rolling it out in a very deliberate fashion, first determining through some kind of a commission what needs to be done, what needs to be withdrawn, how do we target, running some pilot projects, that seems like a reasonable way to do it, and I hope that based on that learning it will be revised to fit the budgetary room.
That would mean that other subsidies would basically have to go if this is to actually work.
I think basically you have to figure out what you need to do and what is today being substituted for by these things. For example, I mean, just on top of my head, if there is a pension which is being given to older people, but now you're giving them direct income, there is a question of whether you need to continue giving them the pension if in fact this direct income is going to give them that cushion that they didn't have earlier. The broader point is, this is, I think, as I've seen it argued, of course we need to go into the details, it's a top-up.
It's a top-up, yeah.
And so if you're already getting something I think
like, let's say 6,000, then you get 6,000 more.
Exactly. So the question is, how much is that going to be, and what other schemes is it going to substitute for?
So do you think this idea is a potential game changer? How do you
I
look
think
at
you,
it?
with your political antenna, are far better poised to ask that. I do think that this election, it's very important we focus on the economics. What does India need going forward? I worry that we are not paying enough attention to the problem of joblessness we talked about earlier, that we're not paying enough attention to the kinds of institutions we need to become a middle income country. We're not paying attention to the next round of reforms, which we desperately need to enhance our growth rate. If in fact our growth rate is not as close to the 7% as we think it is, then the question is, what is holding us back? Why is the private sector not investing? And to my mind, what that means is we really need to focus on this next generation, which is going to increase our growth potential. And that requires serious thinking on the economic front. My sense is that is as important as any of the other issues.
As you say, you hope that that's what the election campaign would largely focus on.
I hope that's what, because that will be central to our national security going forward, that we have a strong internal economy.
That's an interesting way of putting it, which is that you therefore don't separate this national security conversation from a good, strong internal economy.
Absolutely.
Which is what's happening right now.
Think of what China did. And that's some of what I talk about in the book, that China essentially focused on growing strong first, economically. And in the process funded, today we see a pretty significant army and military power. But it is on the back of very strong economic growth over many years. And to my mind, that is something we also need to do. We need that our strength will come from strong economic growth, and also broad-based, so that we reduce some of the tensions between the various groups as we get growth.
Well, you've been also quoted as saying recently that you're in favor of strengthening the RBI's autonomy, through statutorily. Now, why would you think there's a need for that, to do it, make it, a statutory authority? Is that born out of your own experience with the RBI and what happened afterwards?
No, I think as a nation grows, it starts finding the need for stronger institutions as we reach middle income. For example, there's a crying need today for a fiscal commission, which will look at what is proposed in the budget, see if it's reasonable, opine on it, and have the government take that into account, so that there is some discipline on the budgetary process. In the same way as we have a monetary policy committee determining interest rates, a fiscal commission determining the feasibility of budgetary proposals. That would be a good discipline to have. Otherwise, longer run, there is a risk that our budgets don't mean what they say. So these are the kinds of institutional changes we really need. And as part of that, I would say the old view that we'll figure out things by give and take creates a lot of confusion amongst international investors, amongst domestic investors. And we need a lot of investment capital for what comes next, the next sort of burst of investment growth that we need. And to reassure investors, both domestic and international, I think some institutions which convey the strength of the economy and the respect the economy has for where we are going, I think that is quite important.
Do you think that the RBI's supervisory role also over the years is something that needs to be relooked at? I mean, for instance, the way the Nirav Modi scam played out, other, controversies over bad loans, etc. Is there a case here that the RBI itself needs to sort of change the way it's working?
I think every institution does self-examination, and the RBI is no exception. But I think the idea of having to report periodically to the Parliament on what you're doing, why you're doing, and listening to the questions of parliamentarians is something that a number of committees have suggested. We tried to do it, meeting regularly. It's something that is useful because it holds you accountable to the elected representatives of the people, and something like the Humphrey Hawkins testimony, which the Federal Reserve Chairman gives to Congress, something like that on a, maybe twice a year to the parliamentary, to a parliamentary committee might be a useful practice.
In late 2017, you had said that the government had consulted the RBI about demonetization, and that at that time you had all advised against it or warned of the negative consequences of going ahead with something like that. Now here we are, 2.5 years later, and we've just had the latest RBI data come out, which shows that there is more than 19% currency in circulation today than there was before demonetization was happened. So what was the point of that exercise?
Look, I don't want to travel back over that. I think we've threshed it out back and forth. I think, again, to your point about looking back at errors in judgment, it might be useful to go back over that particular decision and see how it was actually taken and what the longer term consequences were. We now have enough time that has filtered by to ask the question, did it have, did it meet some of the objectives it had? Certainly we know some it didn't, but maybe there are others that it did. And ask, in fact, what is the learning from this? Every modern economy which takes such a momentous decision has to also do some self-examination based on actual data and ask, did this work or did it not work as advertised? And how could we improve the process of decision making in such a way that we don't, if it is found to be on net strongly negative, that we don't do it again, and if it's found to be positive, well, what are the benefits from
Tell
this?
Tell people that.
Yeah.
Sell it. Yeah.
I think that self-examination, whether it's the RBI or it's the government, is something whose time has come, especially as we're getting to become an economy which is nearing middle income, where some of these decisions have huge effects.
Coming back to the scheme that Rahul Gandhi announced, you also have the
Let's
government.
Get back to the book.
I'm getting back to the book as well, and no, it is actually related to the book. And you have the government's sort of Kisan Yojana and the 6,000 rupees a year that they've announced. It's competitive populism. We're in election year. How do you look at that kind of competitive populism? Is that healthy for the economy? Is that politically healthy?
Well, let me put it this way: that politicians have a place also. That the dangers of populism rise when people think the experts are running the show, and the experts don't have all the right answers. The technocrats don't have the right answers always. Brexit is a vote against the Brussels technocrats. So I think it's a mistake to believe that only the technocrats have the answer. Give you an example: the midday meal scheme that was started, I think, by MGR in Tamil Nadu, had tremendous benefits people found down the line for the nutritional development of children. It wasn't centrally focused on whether they learnt more, but at least they came to school to eat, and in the process absorbed some knowledge, but also absorbed nutrition, which helped their development, right? So sometimes I should say the technocrats have it deeply wrong, and the politicians have it right. I think the job is to get both together so that we can understand the constraints of the economy. Not everything the politician wants is doable or feasible, but at the same time recognize that the politicians have to respond to a more public sort of sense of disquiet. And if they don't, then much worse things can happen. So in that sense, you need a dialogue between the two. You need the politician to respect the technocratic expertise that comes from playing this or understanding the macroeconomy and so on. And the technocrat has to respect that the politician understands the pulse of the people and understands some of the angst there. And we are a democracy. In a sense, the book is about how we merge the two, the democracy as well as the impulses from capitalism, so that we get a better whole.
Well, I want to finally go back to another very interesting passage from your book where you said that India's problems also stem from the fact that unlike the US, where there's an independent private sector that criticizes the government, even on issues that are not related to them, in India, it's actually the opposite. And you're saying that the Indian private sector largely applauds all government policy, and you can see that a determined government can cow down the private sector and the press with threats or bribe them with government contracts. This is actually a very relevant observation in today's India. If you could elaborate on that.
Well, I mean, I have an anecdote in the book about where India's top business magnate was placed in the line to meet Mr. Obama when he came, and it turns out to be number 83 because we all had number cards.
Yeah.
And that is really a little worrisome, both because the magnate being positioned in public eyes in number 83, but we know that many of the bureaucrats who are ahead in line will eventually end up working for that magnate down the line as they retire from their jobs. So this is a very uneven sort of distribution of power, which creates the possibility of very close, cozy relationships, and that is unhealthy for any economy. I think what I'm trying to suggest is we need action on both the governmental side as well as the private sector side. First, the extent of overlap, the extent of contracts the government holds over the private sector, the tariffs, the licenses. We need to bring much more transparency into those processes so that it doesn't become the whim of any government to give or take away. How are press advertisements sort of determined? Who gets them and who doesn't? I think we need a more transparent process for that. Otherwise, we will always have the private sector at the mercy of the government. At the same time, I argue we have a government which has tremendous power, but fairly modest capacity at delivering some of the services that people need. I mean, we know that it's very hard for the government. It announces a huge number of programs to actually roll it out and implement it is very difficult because on the ground it has very limited resources. And of course, in terms of capability at the top, we don't have the kind of very, very qualified professionals with deep domain expertise that industrial country governments have. So we are sort of lacking on a lot of sides in terms of capability. This is not to take away from the very smart, dedicated people we have in government, but we need to strengthen that. And we need to strengthen the capacity on the one hand, but limit the discretion and the extent of arbitrariness that exists in government decisions. That will make us get two benefits. One, it will make us a stronger, a more capable government, but it will also have a stronger independent private sector which can act as a check and balance on the government. That, to my mind, will take us to a much better place than we are today. I think we're going in that direction. It's a process of development, but we need to be conscious about that we need to go in this direction because that is going to give us the balance. And ultimately, the book is about balance. We need to create that balance in India also.
I think that explains why every industrialist says that the budget is 10 out of 10 or 11 out of 10.
11 out of 10.
No, normally that's what they say. Dr. Raghuram Rajan, thank you so much for speaking to us on NDTV. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.